Hello, welcome to the second session. My name is Kenneth Pruitt. I'm the Vice President for Global Centers. And I'd just say a word or two by way of introducing this session. Those of you who heard the first panel will be shocked at how superficial what it is that I'm about to say. Given the complexity of the issues that they put on the table. But nevertheless, here's a very, very superficial metaphor, if you will. People are always asking me, because I'm supposed to have an answer to this question, you know, what is a global university? And the most that I can muster by way of an answer is that if you think of Columbia University as three spaces, one of those spaces, let us say, is the horizontal space. And that means the centers, the institutes, the departments, the divisions, the schools, you know, just sort of spread across geographic space. But there is a, you know, we've got a horizontal structure kind of institutionally. We also have a vertical structure. If you start with the senior faculty, the junior faculty, the postdocs, the graduates, the undergraduates, so forth. Think of that as a structure as well. And then if you could sort of take both of those things, both that apparatus, which we call our institutional platform, and us as people arrayed in these different roles and positions, and wrap that around the world, then that would make it a global university. And I want to say that seriously because those of you who followed or been part of the Global Center conversation thus far will recognize that there has been very little undergraduate use of those centers. I get asked that question constantly, certainly by the Spectator, and I answer it as best I can each time. Anyway, today's quite important session is that we now have, we're starting down that road. It was never thought that we would not rather quickly try to figure out how we're going to make this a system and a structure amenable to undergraduate education. And a small group led by Victoria DeGrazia from the History Department, who's also serving right now as the acting director of our Global Center in Paris, has been working on how we might launch a new kind of undergraduate opportunity. And Victoria will describe that. Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start with a New Yorker cartoon which came out about a year or two ago, so let's date it. I'm an historian, 2010. This struck me at first as funny because we were talking so much about junior years and how they work, and then after a while, perhaps because I'd seen it, and perhaps because of didn't like the whiteness of it, I didn't like this sort of 40-year-old superciliousness which generated the cartoon about the hapless undergraduate. I found it less funny. What it rather did is cause me to reflect on, is the problem of the junior year abroad, which says we need a new way of studying abroad, is it a problem much more along the questions that were raised by Roz Morris and Mark Wigley, that really we don't know what our students, even what we should be getting out of this effort to go elsewhere, a go elsewhere, goodness knows, which could also be a go elsewhere within our own country, which seems in many ways more and more foreign. So we could have, let's say, 6 months in Detroit. What it did make me think, again, as an historian, simply to start in the way of premise, was how different my own experience was as an undergraduate going abroad in the 1960s with what it can be now in 2010, or perhaps it was in a much earlier period when the first kinds of year abroad programs were established, which was right after World War I, when the idea was that you would begin to temper some of the uncertainties of the Grand Tour by putting it into the college curriculum. And it was particularly pioneered by women's colleges, in particular Smith College, which set up the first year abroad at Paris in Reed Hall, still there today, and then a second one in Florence. And that was the one I went on in the 1960s. And in going there, you know, that word 60s, at least not for those who are really young, some of the older people should have resonance. And of course, it was to get out of the U.S. and its oppression and to flee from very oppressive universities, especially their sexual oppression, that is all the rules and parietals and so on, and to live. And it was so then, too, that, first of all, your parents really weren't worrying that much. If they were, they couldn't let you know anyway because nobody called, and letters were fairly costly and fairly infrequent. These were programs that were set up in the universities, so we were right in what was then in Europe an elite university with faculty members who were very poorly paid, and therefore they would be willing to teach in this case Italian, to these young women whom they thought were very, very stupid, but because they didn't speak Italian very well, but probably maybe were stupid anyway. And in a situation where we had very little money, but it was in dollars, we were placed in families, usually declining gentry of some sort who needed to take in boarders, which we were, so we'd be part of these rather dreary households, usually with widows. We were involved clearly with the objects of a lot of interest, and half of the group, I think, married Italians or married French people, so that was getting into the other society. Getting into the other society also because there was politics and political movement, and there was also travel. My year I got to Libya, that was before Gaddafi, and in the summer got to Prague, which just when the Russians were coming in. So this was getting on the ground, and that was relatively easy in those days. And I think for many of the students, it was life transforming, given the very, very differences. I don't want to think that, hey, since then we've come a long way and it's all been decline. And it's hard for me to imagine exactly how we could reproduce that kind of experience for students today. There's so many other conditions that made that possible, and there's so many other much newness today, which could make for a very, very different experience. But what I wanted to do today is to present an experiment that we are engaged now in at Reed Hall in Paris. And my premise is, however, that it's not only about undergraduates. That is, I regarded myself doing what I did in the 1960s, not as an undergraduate, but as a person wanting to be out in the world. And I think it may be a little condescending, a little bit too pushed, too channeled if we say this is for undergraduates, as if we knew what undergraduates needed, and as if this was simply a part, a piece, or something separate from the whole effort. Because I think the undergraduates are an absolutely signal part of our existence at the university. Most of us who teach, certainly in the arts and sciences, but throughout, say, hey, we wouldn't be what we were without our students, whether they're the undergraduate students, which are very, very special, the graduate students, MA students, and so on. So the university is totally about them, and it's about our relationship, even in our research work with them, and it's on that basis that we have gone forward. So what we have imagined here, and I would like to say it's more than a vision now, but we're hoping to start actual practices, which we can talk about, is the Columbia Global Centers of Europe, which means that we have more centers, perhaps, at least in our idea, but the particular one that we're thinking about now is in a space, a beautiful building, which is a place, place called Reed Hall, all right? And what we have in mind, and this is perhaps about a lot of an imagination, but I want you to keep that in mind, is an undergraduate program which will be situated in a school. and we thought of lots of other words, and we can, forum, place, center, institute, and so on, but an advanced school for global studies. Advanced is also a word that's very commonly used in France for something special, and a school has perhaps a broader meaning than it does here. So these are slogans: research, teach, and connect. Okay, the mission and the location are very much connected. And so this school is dedicated to relaunching social inquiry on foundational issues from unconventional perspectives. Let me break that down. I am a Europeanist, my studies, but I think a very rich vein of studies on the social sciences and the humanities in the United States has come about through a 2, even 3 century conversation between Europe and America, both how they imagined each other. And this has constantly renewed itself in very crucial moments in the 1880s, European universities, in the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1950s, sometimes with Europe more powerful, sometimes with the US more powerful. Now let's say both are in many ways inept, facing the rest of the world, and this will be then a grounds for confrontation. That's why it seems to be particularly chosen for this Paris Center. Paris now understood here as an avenue, France, but also another way of looking at these new global processes and to confront them with our own. We conceived of it also as confronting big issues of our times and using Paris and Europe as vantage points. And I say big issues, not big problems. I think because some of the top problems, the way they're set up, like sustainability, those are subject to a lot of, shall we say, discussion. And so we're thinking big issues because that's what Columbia tends to do in many, many different ways across the board. We think of this location and the center as mobilizing resources and people to sustain multi-perspectival research, not just multidisciplinary, all different ways, undergraduates, graduates, professors, scholars, and so on, different ways, practitioners. And we conceive of this school as connecting this research to teaching, and to teaching the next generation of our global thinker, practitioner, citizens, undergraduates, MA students, and so on. And we conceive of this center also as doing what we do at Columbia, communicating outcomes to appropriate audiences. And this through new pedagogy, the word has come up already, Roz mentioned that this is a difficult problem to think about, but also the new media, and understood that we're taking command of them in this particular space for specific purposes. More simply now, what does this school do? Well, it brings Columbia faculty and students to confront competing and alternate views of the world. Already clear enough. It selects and it hosts and it invests in core research projects from Columbia over 2-3 year cycles. And we have conceived of this first cycle, and we will have a colleague, Seamus Khan, who's here to speak about how we would go about developing that, especially teaching a master class on it at Reed Hall. And this is very important to give it a focus, and because it's small scale. And our school mentors undergraduates, whom we will call Columbia Global Scholars, who are selected here sophomore year, we'll talk more about that, to do independent research projects in this Paris, Europe space. Of course, it is about the French language. It is about the local language. It is about multilingualism, about flexible linguistic practices. This is the world. America's monolingualism is, shall we say, an exception, an aberration. More and more students, American students coming to Columbia, are coming with Mandarin. It may not be the best Mandarin. If they're coming from India, they come perhaps with 3 languages. Multilingualism is everywhere. And even if we can say the whole world speaks English, they're speaking English plus, or other things plus English. So we are at a disadvantage with our one language, and we count on here, even if the students don't know good French, they're not going to be French majors. I don't think at this point any of us wants our students. I don't think I would be so happy if my daughter said she was going to major in French today, because I'd say, oh my God, the world's big and vast, and maybe there are other languages too. But we will now try to get them the French to be able to go in, and this is true also of our faculty. Okay? So now, who comes? I've set up some people who will be coming. Well, intrepid researchers, and I will present in a couple of minutes Seamus Khan. This is not to be condescending to a wonderful, younger colleague, but I think that very much our new projects going forward are built on our younger faculty. They're the ones that are going to benefit. They need this time away from their formations to move on to their next and main big projects for their careers. We would select them on the basis of what the kinds of projects they're doing. They would ensure research leadership and collaborate in Europe with appropriate interlocutors. So we are going to be building, each brings in his, her own network. We heard somehow the complicated nature of Roz's networks. I won't even talk about Mark's, but each person, each group does tend to have interlocutors, but it's also our purpose here to help them to find different kinds of interlocutors if we think perhaps they've missed somebody coming to Paris, for example, the sociologist who knows only people connected to Bourdieu, very possible, because the French we all tend to, make certain kinds of models, and we say no. There are, brilliant scholars in working on, in new ways, sociological ways, on Russian oligarchs or on other forms of inequality who are not out of the Bourdieu school. And we expect them also to learn. They're protected, but at the same time, they're learning from new collaborators, they're learning from student perspectives, and they are also trying, one way or another, to belong to the local community. We expect dedicated faculty, and the distinction here is simply that we are going to need people who are teaching there, who are engaged there, to provide intellectual leadership. And now this doesn't mean, again, this is a branch campus, an extension of Columbia, but we do know it's very, very important, especially now, to keep the connections and also to have people coming and going. We, above all, and here's now, the adventurous students, which we will call here GS peers. Okay, so these are students who would be selected in their end of their sophomore year. We assume that they'd be attracted by the intellectual agenda, that they have the possibility of acquiring new linguistic and research skills, that they see the potential for vocational and career prospects. We all know how Columbia undergraduates, also GS, Barnard too is involved here, engineering, they're very competitive, let's say. They know a good thing, and we hope that they're going to see a really, really good thing for themselves. Whether it's short-term because it's a credit or long-term because it's going to change their lives, we hope they're going to see that. We would select them on the basis of their capacity for independent work. We hope they will learn from the faculty and act as an inspiration also to faculty, and that they're going to be transformed some way or another by their stay in Europe. That's not easy to predict. And that when they come back, they will have ways of understanding what global community is, which will then be debated all of their lives by them. Okay, so just to be a little more specific here, they have to be willing to enhance their linguistic capacity. We have talked lots about the importance of the bilingualism in Paris. It works. Culturally, it works, though more and more in French and more students studying in France are learning English. It's still a French speaking, and it's imperative. We're thinking that you'd be selected then in their late second year so that they can get their language up to par. And this is a whole big discussion with some technical aspects about how you convert Romance languages to a third one. You know Spanish? The chances are you can move it, with a lot of pressure. You have learned, Mandarin, very difficult languages. It's quite possible that you can learn second, third languages, fourth languages are easier. We expect them to pursue independent research and provide them the immense support that's required to do that. This is not sending a young person off to follow a notion. Getting theses, getting independent projects is a very labor intense for everybody. We expect them to come back to Columbia as seniors, present their work, write theses, share this knowledge with peers. In other words, to bring it back as a very significant experience to become part of a changing Columbia community. And we expect them, and we will work to get them, internships to go back. I say here Europe, but that's elsewhere, and to combine perhaps eventually their interest and language training with professional training and advanced degrees. So we could begin to see what we are seeing now at Reed Hall in the MA program in public health, which is young doctors who come from Baghdad or Kabul or Addis Ababa, who now have 3 or 4 languages under their belt, and who are also in the Paris program, the MA provided by the School of Public Health, learning English as well as French, so they're very avid, and who already have changed the complexion, and clearly this is going to be a kind of model for what our future students could be. Let's just take a look at student 1, all right? So these are sort of inventions, and I think we could put a nice biologist in here too. But so the American of Chinese background, knowledge of Mandarin, and has high school French. And that's more common than one would think, because his high schools still do teach French, such that they teach any languages at all. An economics major, and interested in housing crises, some problem of, I can't say why in the United States, but anyway. So we have advisors both from Columbia, and there's good political economy at Paris 1. In Paris, takes a class, 20th century political economy. That's not, of course, it's offered at Columbia. Economic geography, that's long since disappeared from the United States. And a master class, and Seamus Khan and I will be talking about that in a minute. The rise and fall of middle classes, so connected to inequality, some problem that I've been playing around with. Coming back, let's see. It looks like I dropped out the kind of independent project. Well, after consulting with Barry Bergdahl, who's on our advisory committee, and also Reinhold Martin, a good topic is the study of ghost towns, the new ghost towns in Europe as a result of the housing crisis, the big financial catastrophes, and it's particularly been noticeable in Spain and some places also in Britain, a lot in Greece. So comes back, does a thesis on big city housing. Paris has brought in the public-private dimension, and that person returns to Europe, 5th year, with an internship at the European Union Housing Commission. All right, the second example, again, American fluent in Spanish. Many students who do have that fluency, sometimes coming from their family background. History major, taking Professor Khalidi's very large class, sophomore year, in the Middle East and studying Arabic. Recommended to go to Paris, where they have fabulous Arabic studies, the best Arabist in the world, both at Sciences Po and at also Collège de France, where the student would have to audit lessons because it's not an undergraduate facility, takes courses in Arabic, history of the Mediterranean, and so on and so forth. This is my thing, historian, the fabulous archives in the south of France of all the wars of colonial repression during the 1920s, which has never been studied, and comes back, does interesting thesis combining Arabic, Spanish, and French, and thereafter gets an internship with the American Cultural Attaché, whose name is Rafidi Khalil. She's an Egyptian American, and he's offered to take on interns from our program. So We are gotten now this through the undergraduate course approval process, and we're going to start recruiting next week for this undergraduate program, and we expect we will. We will start this in January, 8-month program, so it's longer than the normal. It's not a quantity program. It's true that only about 24% of Columbia undergraduates at one time or another go abroad. Many of them, the most, for 4-month maximum, 3.5, 4-month periods, which you can't do a lot with. You could do more than on 2-week programs or 3-week programs. But right now, I think we really have to do an experiment with getting the nature, the quality of the program, the kind of intellectual experience that we want. This has come out of considerable thinking and talking with many people, actually, who are here today. Originally, there was some talk, hey, make it into a think tank. Okay, big issues, that's important. Discussion about how much faculty need protection for their work, an Institute for Advanced Science. Nothing wrong with it, maybe not Paris, because there are a lot of distractions and it's very expensive. A scholarly community with a particular kind of academic cultural emphasis. Like the American Academy in Rome, gorgeous, it looks just like this because it was McKim and White, but it's mainly on archaeology, art history, Italian studies. Or the Reed Hall is now a teaching facility. It's got junior year abroad programs in it. It's got a fine Columbia Penn undergraduate programs, which currently has an enrollment of about 85, including about 50 of those are Columbia students, Columbia Penn. They come from other places as well, which is a more typical junior year abroad, but very high quality because it does insist on French and has the students also moving around the French university system. There are other models of teaching facilities. Chicago has, in Paris and elsewhere now, a very refined program which just moves a cohort, let's say, over to Paris or to Beijing, where they do their math, the core, they do their, their other, global core, other dimensions of that. Faculty goes with them. It's not French. I mean, they don't have French, and of course we're familiar with our neighbors, NYU's franchise model, that is just building the structure elsewhere, and I think this weekend, if you read in the New York Times, you would have gotten a sense at least just of the physical disadvantages that to have a student outing, well, to get to the thing from the housing, you have to go through 4 8-line highways, and it's pretty isolated. So, why this model? And again, I want to here put it back, undergraduate into this broader. It combines innovative research and learning. And it's dedicated, it's Columbia. Every point, it's Columbia. It's truly Columbia. It engages with urgent problems. It draws on the arts and sciences as well as the schools of practice. It recognizes that global scholarship involves different moments, so that the connections have to be made somewhat in an ad hoc basis. In other words, it's not simply reaching out and having everything in. We are finding more and more all of these agreements, all of these pacts that are made between this school and that school. They're meaningless unless there are faculty and students behind them. There are arrangements that are being made, if you want, person to person or group to group. Hans Decker brought that up earlier, but it involves institutional sort of building in this new framework, which means we don't know how it's going to end up because it's going to be a different kind of community. And finally, goodness knows, provides the focus needed for fundraising. Okay, we want to briefly, in the time that remains, I wanted to introduce Seamus Khan, you have to come up here in our living room setting. Seamus is a colleague in sociology. I have to say background because I'm afraid we've become a little bit of a poster boy for the Europeans. So the Seamus is an Irish Seamus, and the Khan is a Pakistani Khan, and he is an American, and colleague at University of Wisconsin, and his book called Privilege, which is on the way the elites reproduce, looking at private schooling, is very important. And so the idea would be to continue this work in the framework of the Global Center, enabling this, what has become first a national project on inequality, but also has now built into it a very substantial global. And so maybe Seamus, just speak briefly about the topic, and then the idea of the master class.
Sure. The idea behind the project, which is funded by Columbia and also the Alliance program, which is hosted here at Columbia as well, is to create a research network of scholars on elites. And the reason we're studying elites is we're interested in inequality, but much of the inequality that's emerged in the United States over the last 40 years is explained not by poverty, but by wealth. That is, rich people are getting richer, and so the gap between rich and poor is increasing. And we're seeing this not just in the United States, we're seeing it in Britain, in France, and across the globe. And at the same time that we're seeing rises in inequality within countries, we're actually observing declines in inequality between countries. So for the first time in the last 20 years, we see that the differences between countries are constricting a little bit. And it requires a broader perspective than just a national perspective. And so last year we convened, or actually this fall, an elite research network. It's a network of about 30 scholars based primarily here and in Paris, but drawing on people from all around Europe to explore this issue and to explore the issue of how to study inequality by looking at elites. And we're going to host this group next November, or this November, I guess, in Paris. So we're going to throw a 3-day conference in Paris with a series of undergraduate, graduate, and faculty papers to hopefully advance this kind of research. And Reed Hall is going to be the place where we do this. It's going to be our home in Europe for this kind of project. And for those of you who don't know much about the French Academy, it's a particularly nice to have a neutral space to host academics. I mean, in the US it would be nice to have a neutral space as well. So the idea is to bring people together to address this kind of issue, to address inequalities. And one of the models that we're using for undergraduates is called a masterclass model. And the masterclass model is based upon something in the performing arts. And the idea is that people learn the craft of research, the craft of studying a problem from a kind of expert, a virtuoso, if you will. And so the model of training at Reed Hall is going to begin with an extension of this idea from the performing arts into the junior year abroad. So do you want to address the...
Right, yes, Seamus is a cellist, and I regard myself as much more, if I should say violinist, as a master artist and craftsman. So what seems very, very important is we're going to, in this kind of structure, we're going to have students from very different backgrounds. And so to set up a class, which a Columbia faculty member teaches, which is related to inequality, we would set it up, let's say, over four major sessions over a semester. So the students, assuming, again, we could very well have a biologist. We have had biology students going to Paris. They work at sometimes at the Pasteur Institute. But let's say the group of 15, perhaps 20 the first year, they have notions of what they want to do. But as part of the class, they have to, begin exercises, learning how to research their interest. And then at the end of a 3-week cycle, let's say it is on privilege, as part of a larger study of inequality, the master would come in, and there would be this kind of give and take. So the important thing is we're seeing among our undergraduates, they want big concepts and they want lots of skills, language skills, research skills. And research is very new now because the canons are all disrupted. They are working in many, many different fields to pull out ways of understanding their effort. So we imagine, let's say, Seamus coming in for those 2 weeks. I could imagine very wonderfully Mark Wigley coming in, the problem of urban, the city and inequality. It could be understood in. It's been a constant theme in architecture. Goodness knows, Roz, coming in as an anthropologist, but setting up the problem. So it enables us to lay out as clearly as possible both the big concept, the intermediary problems, which the students are picking up on, and the kinds of skills, which are very, very diverse in order to get a clarification of their project, to problematize it, and then begin to elaborate it. So what we have in mind at Reed Hall is what we understand students are most eager for is big problems, which they want to help redefine, and the skills which are necessary, which we regard as research skills, language skills that are necessary. And so, going forward, we really count on this model. It's a model which is also the best way to engage our colleagues abroad, and for them to engage us. And this is, yes, the Reed Hall space, but we also move into their spaces, and they come into ours. There are classes that are co-taught already in the Columbia Penn program, co-taught, but also with co-students. So 10 students from the French system, 10 students from our Columbia undergraduate body. And that works well because it does mean the students are making friends with one another, sharing their work with one another. Yet another point which makes it so different from, let's say, the 60s, when families were a way in to the society, we recognize that the families seem to be actually an impediment, to have to go home and everybody sits in front of the TV or whatever. It's not so clear. So we would be housing our students at the university housing. Columbia has these, I'm forgetting their names now, I want to call them international houses, Africa House, America House, Hungarian House, and so on. So the students would be spread among their peers who have very diverse backgrounds. Paris is certainly an international city. So that's where we are on this, and I guess we'll welcome questions on where we are.
What I'm really interested in right now, if I could, is any students who might be interested.
Sign up.
We can have general questions later, but we're really particularly interested right now for any students in the room who could imagine themselves wanting to know more about this in order to think about it for themselves or this next year.
They could probably also, right, we're especially interested in sophomores. Yes, in fact, they have to be sophomores because it's tricky otherwise. So why you could check in with us, after we'll take your name and.
Some of these questions framed now,
Yeah.
you can give quick answers, yes, because right now, hopefully, students who will be in their second semester of their sophomore year now, and think about this for next year.
Tell, well, there probably, it could be switching. The plan is that they would take the summer immersion course either in the US or perhaps now in Europe. And she has to have a good year. That's all you can say. When it's such short term, it's a good year, and that we understand. We understand that much. That she could.
Yeah, but also, very, very important, this is designed to allow for research opportunities, the summer research opportunities anywhere in Europe, not Penn. And therefore, if you were interested in a project that would take her to Germany, we would then find a place where she would have a mentor and whether there would be some kind of opportunity. Then use her own money.
perspective of inequality, which would be much broader, and there would then be a module on elites. So you would spend 3 weeks studying the question of elites. And the idea of the masterclass would be that there would be a faculty member there responsible for teaching the students over a 2-week period where they would be reading on the subject and doing a very small-scale research project. And then someone would join the class for the 3rd week and talk to the students about their conceptualizations of projects. But there's certainly no commitment that these things wouldn't change. And in fact, I imagine that the demands of students themselves would be important in terms of driving the sets of questions that we might host at this center.
Well, I mean, this is a question, really interesting question, whether, well, extracurricular in Paris, I mean, the ideal is that, you know, at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I mean, that you're out and around, and you just go as far as, I mean, I don't want you to go to Libya now, but hey, you know, you just do what you do and break out of the conventions of programming here. I mean, frankly, my concern now is that we don't structure it so much that there's not, you know, the capacity. But we're very confident, knowing our students here, that when they have a project, they run with it, and they're excited to share it and workshop it, and we'll have the media capacities to send it back home, to send it to Amman and Jordan, to certainly on this middle class, the inequality in middle classes. I have colleagues in, well, Fudan and China, and we're very confident that we'll have communication with them. So, you know, the extracurricular, they have housing, they're separate. Kids lead their lives. And, you know, we hope that there's also ways of getting them into European cyberspace. It starts with Al Jazeera, but there's many other ways in which cyberspace there is different from our cyberspace. And one of the big problems we have is how do we get kids out of American cyberspace where they're not all sitting around constantly, you know, doing, you know, the other possibilities. So, you know, it's a fabulous world out there. That may be flippant, but
Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's been any discussion about a group class for the core group of students who were studying abroad to kind of integrate them back into the community and together.
it's very possible. It's very.
I'd like to say a word about that. One of the things that's happened, because this particular idea is already moving around at the university. Another group of faculty came to me the other day, Mr. Max and Ms. Asian faculty, and said they wanted to model something on this plan. But they said they would only do it if they could add a senior year seminar that brought everybody back together in these different kinds of experiences they had. But that was made sense. Now, I would import that idea back to this group and say, should we now put that into the, so that we come back and have a follow that. Certainly for those of you who are going to be doing this and then writing the senior thesis, they may have a lot of things to create at home for that. I'm going to have to close this down in order to stay on schedule. But I should say that after the final panel tonight, this afternoon, that the volunteers will be there talking to undergraduates. And the other panelists this afternoon will have the 3 main people in this university responsible for teaching the program: the Dean of College, the Dean of Graduate General Studies, and the President of Barnard. So there'll be more time to talk about these kinds of ideas. But then at the very end, there will be a reception, and I think particularly James can be here for the reception, and you can capture them and ask more specific questions. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.